Hello and welcome. This is the Fit for Privacy Podcast, the podcast for professionals. I'm your host Punit Bhatia. In this podcast, we talk to influencers so that you get to listen and learn from their experiences and thoughts. Remember, this is not legal advice, and if you need one, please contact a professional with your situation. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fit for Privacy podcast. Today we have a very special guest. She's the founding member of Euro Digital. She's a valued speaker at seminars and events across the globe. She's also in direct contact with national and international players and is the voice of business and IT at different levels of government and regulators. Ladies and gentlemen, she is Danielle Jacobs, the CEO of Beltug in Belgium. Welcome, Danielle.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for inviting me, Punit.
I'm so happy to have you. So, would you be telling us something about Beltug and also about yourself?
So, my name is Danielle Jacobs, and I am the CEO of Beltug. Beltug is the Association of Digital Technology Leaders in Belgium. That means our audience are people from large companies, mid-sized companies as well, coming from the business user side of the market. So our members, we have 490 companies as a member. They are banks, they are retail, industry, public institutions. So it's really the demand side of the market. What do? We aim to tackle challenges of the organizations. So covering topics like privacy, for example, but also data governance, IoT, 5G, hybrid IT, and so on. So it's very special for us to bring companies together to exchange experiences. That's what's most important.
Very interesting, and I can vouch for that, having been in your sessions, that yes, exchange experience is one thing that Beltug does very, very well for companies of different size. But how does privacy fit into the priorities of Beltug?
Well, because we work on the priorities of our members, we saw that privacy is something very, very important. It became important before the introduction of the GDPR in Europe. But we see there are so many questions and so many possibilities to exchange knowledge because this is a new domain, although the GDPR exists for 2 years now. There are still new guidelines, there are some new decisions and so on. So we really see the benefit of bringing privacy specialists together so that they can learn from each other, whether it's about the implementation of cookies, whether it's now about the COVID-19 situation and the new challenges for privacy, whether it's about GDPR audits, and especially in our domain, as we are an association of IT user sites, which kind of questions do you need to ask to your IT providers to make sure that they are compliant with the privacy regulations? So privacy is one of our top priorities right now.
It's fascinating to see how GDPR or privacy is becoming important for everyone. Of course, companies need to comply. There are privacy professionals, then there are consulting firms, there are contractors and vendors, and now I also understand that companies facilitating, guiding other organizations also are touched by privacy. It's interesting.
Right.
So, how would you describe GDPR in one word? That's a question I generally ask, and it's quite popular.
Okay, it's a challenge.
It's a challenge, indeed. It is a challenge. Absolutely. And you mentioned that the companies also find a lot of challenges in terms of implementing GDPR or being compliant with privacy. So, what do you observe is happening in different companies? Of course, you do a lot of things, as you mentioned, Internet of Things, AI, technology. But in terms of privacy specifically, what do you observe is happening, or how has the journey been in last 2 years and where they are right now?
Well, it's of course a very mixed view because different countries different companies are at different levels. But maybe I can say what we find as positive from the GDPR and also where
Yeah.
the next challenges still are because there are still many. So what we feel in companies is that they say the extended scope, so the broader material and territorial scope from GDPR with the legislation we had before, it really ensures that all actors present on the at the IU in Europe, they are subject to the same rules. So that's positive. And there's also increased harmonization. As the GDPR is a regulation, it applies directly in all EU members. So that is common knowledge. But what we see now, and that is very interesting, we feel, is that GDPR is also setting the standards for comparable legal initiatives outside Europe. If you see
Right.
it's happening in California or even in Brazil, we have in Belgium about 60% of our members that work at an international level. And so for them, it's very important to see that what are the possibilities, where can you cooperate or work in the same way in different countries, and what about the rest of the world, because Europe is just Europe and not everything. So that's about the extended scope and the increased harmonization. What is very important, I think, is that because of the GDPR, what we see is that now companies know privacy is important. That is a very, very big difference than what it was 2 years ago.
Right.
That's a major difference. So the most companies are now more aware, and we get now more and more questions from our CIOs, for example,
Mm-hmm.
to say how can we explain to our boards how important the privacy protection
Interesting.
is, not only for the fines but also for the image of the company. So you see the knowledge, the awareness is much bigger than it used to be, and I think that is very important as we all deal. Well, we are in a data economy, so that's a very positive point. What also is interesting is that we see now more and more that data protection becomes a kind of sales argument. So uh, no, but it's true. It becomes a competitive advantage, and I
Absolutely.
think that's a very a big advantage of what. Although we complain a lot in our privacy council about this GDPR, it's difficult and it's a lot of work.
Right.
But at the other hand, you see that it is an advantage that we have this kind of privacy regulation as well, because it really brought data protection as a mainstream discussion topic. So that's positive. Of course, there is also room for improvement. What we see is that a lot of DPOs and companies, they really suffer from all the GDPR documentation, the transparency obligations. They really require a significant amount of work. So
Right.
this is something where companies ask, is this really bringing added value to the data subjects we want to protect? Another difficult one is although we have the harmonization because it's a European regulation, member states have different options, and that makes it very difficult. Because if you have differences on, well, for example, on the IT tools,
Right.
tools people want to use for GDPR, so it's very difficult because all the countries can do different things. It's difficult for HR departments because in some countries you are not allowed uh, to um, to store specific data, and in other countries you need to store that specific data.
Right.
So it's complicated. And maybe a last one on the supervision. As I said before, about 60% of our companies works at an international level. Belgium is a very small country. And so the supervision is now attributed to the national authorities, but the coherence mechanism and the one-stop shop, they are not perfect at all. So it's not a real replacement for unified and harmonized supervision. And if you see, for example, the regulator in Ireland, they get really a lot of questions, and so that's something there is still room for improvement as well.
Yeah. I think you rightly picked up that there's a lot of scope for improvement. And as it's a new law,
Mhm.
people as well as regulators, companies as well as regulators and people, everybody is getting used to things, getting used to the new normal, used to how do they have to act in one stop shop because they never did so.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and if you can drill down to one big challenge for companies right now, what would that be? You mentioned a lot of them, but what would be the biggest challenge for companies?
The biggest challenge I see within companies, and that's a kind of common denominator, is the difficulties when you have a legislation. So that's legal text that is especially about interpretation. And a lot of the GDPR implementation is about putting it in software where you need yes or no, one or zero. So
Right,
there is a big challenge. And a second challenge, not at the level of the companies, but especially at the level of the DPOs. We see that a lot of DPOs are really suffering with their position within the company. So in the GDPR, there's a central role for the data protection officer.
right,
And yeah, and while this role it has been described extensively in both GDPR, but we see that DPOs really suffer from how to fulfill the role, whether it's about the position in the organization, the resources they get, their independence. So we see there is still uh, there's a kind of frustration, I can say.
yeah, and I think frustration is also from multiple dimensions because I don't know what if you mean that, but sometimes GDPR requires them to be legal professionals, IT professionals, communication professionals, stakeholder management. Everything is upon the DPO, and
Yeah.
at that central role, you cannot sometimes be on top of each and everything, and you can't find people with so many skills in one person.
And it is very difficult to find the right person. That's also
That's
we hear
true.
something more and more. And there is another a kind of professional or academic data protection qualification scheme, which is experienced as really very good. So there are different certifications, but we see that our DPOs that they still feel there's a shortage of a very good framework.
Right. I think the certifications are good for a purpose, but if you want to have a holistic view and holistic education, there are not too many options or
Yeah.
holistic options at the moment.
And how, as a company, how can you know, how can you demonstrate your DPO is qualified? There's not a real benchmark. So that is something which pops up now the last months in our privacy council. So that's
Yeah. I think more than how can you demonstrate your DPO is a capable person. The question before is how do you hire a good one or how do you benchmark one versus the other? But it's the same thing.
yeah.
Once you are sure, you can always demonstrate.
Yeah, and also a very big difficulty in companies is the creation of awareness at the level of all the employees. So what we've done, because we saw that companies were suffering with it, so we brought together, I think it was about 16 companies, and they exchanged all the different training programs they've foreseen for example, people from HR, people from IT, the general employee, the board members, to say how much time would you spend to explain them the importance of GDPR, because of course for somebody from HR it's much more important than for the usual employee. So that
Right.
was a very interesting exercise, I think, because that's a very big challenge for all companies as well. To see it's not just a one-time shot. You have to repeat the awareness always again and again as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so from DPO perspective, it is certainly a challenge in terms of interpreting and automating or kind of explaining what the law is.
Mhm.
And then it becomes person based. But is that also a challenge from companies' perspective, or do companies face a different challenge?
No, it's the same because the DPO is part of them. We just see that the reactions we get from the DPOs right now is, can we do something together to work on this status of the DPO within companies, because it's difficult for them to each in their own company just to ask the good questions to their management. So that's one thing. So at the level of DPO, they certainly feel there's a kind of friction for some of them.
Yeah,
That's one thing. And at the level of the companies, it is also difficult because sometimes I hear companies managers saying, "Oh, the DPO they are doing difficult because they ask too many, they ask too much." But of course, these people are doing their job and they have their independence. So that's a balanced approach is needed, but it's not always so easy.
No, that's true in everything in life. I mean, we need a balanced approach, but the balance is the most challenging aspect of life. And in this case, certainly, because we have a law which is a framework, and from
Yeah.
framework, each company needs to make its interpretation. And
Yeah.
sometimes you see left and right, you see the grass is greener on the other side.
And it's
So,
it's especially if you see in a company, if sometimes I think the GDPR was made by people having in mind the Googles and the Facebooks, but of course the law applies to everybody and also the small companies. Well, every company, although they make seats or whatever, needs to comply. And it is complicated. So even whether you're a large company or a small company, it's difficult for everybody. It's you don't only have the GDPR, you have all these guidelines from the European supervisor. You have the national guidelines. You have the cases now coming.
yeah.
So it's continuing. It's not something which is finished. So
Yeah, it is challenging, and I think you mentioned it very rightly. This is the situation that we are describing in most large companies who can afford, who can have a privacy professional. Imagine a small company who cannot, I mean, financially put, or from a time perspective, put a full-time DPO or full-time privacy professional. How would they learn? How would they manage all these things? It's a
yeah, but
big
even
challenge.
it's also a challenge for large companies because they can have some privacy professionals within their company, but the size of the data and the departments and the number of people they need to deal with is it's much larger as well. So I think it's difficult for everybody. So
Yeah, it is difficult for everybody, and now the complication is starting when other laws, of course, GDPR inspired or GDPR based, are coming up, but each country have their slight variation, and that slight variation doesn't
yeah,
help.
yeah, that really doesn't help.
It only adds up to, as you mentioned earlier on, the complexity in technical systems. Because do you expect a straightforward binary information? If this, then that, then that.
Yeah, that's the main
But it's,
challenge we see. Yeah.
yeah, but
The
it's not
legal
like
text
that.
at one hand and the IT implementations at the other hand, which do not fit together.
No. And I think the answer, especially in GDPR, is it depends. And that never helps in IT systems.
Yeah.
It depends is favorite answer of consultants, but it doesn't help companies.
No.
So it was wonderful to have this quick chat. But if you could pick one quick message or benefits towards companies, what would that quick message be?
For the benefit for companies to have GDPR, you mean?
Yeah, let's start with that.
Well, as I said before, so the awareness within the companies of what they are doing with their data. So it's
Right.
not only that they are scared, maybe at the board level from, oh, we could have a fine or we can have a data leak. It's also a positive something because of GDPR, companies really need to make a very uh, good exercise. Where are their data? Who has access to their data? And that really opened the minds of a lot of people. So I think that's a very, very big benefit.
Right, absolutely. I think they were running the data analytics, big data systems on without knowing what's underneath it, and now they start to know it. Yeah,
And
that's
it
a
makes them more ready for everything what is now coming from the data economy with AI and big data,
true.
with IoT, 5G. It's all interlinked. So it's good that companies realize the kind of data they have and how they need to be protected.
Absolutely. So we have an audience which is generally business professionals and privacy professionals. So if you were to give one message to all of them, what would that be?
A lot of courage.
A lot of courage. That's interesting and very sharp shot. Lots of courage. Yes, you need a lot of courage to be in privacy field and to stay there, hang in there, and things will take care
Yeah,
with
I'm always
action and time.
I'm always very well. I I get a lot of energy of our meetings of our privacy council, where our privacy specialists meet, because they always have so many things to discuss, and every meeting there are new topics that pop up where they want to have chats on, and where they want to have special interest groups on. So it's an exciting topic.
Right, it is exciting. It's never boring.
No.
Even in a pandemic, it has been one law that has been most talked about.
Oh, yes, yeah. It's we had the discussion in our privacy council on what about taking the temperature of employees when they come back to work. What about applications to see whether the social distancing is kept, and it's all the questions are about privacy. It's not
Right.
the technology, it's a privacy.
Yeah, but as we said, GDPR has put privacy at the heart of every discussion that's happening in business these days.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, so in essence of time, Daniel, thanks for being with us. It was a privilege and a pleasure to talk to you, and it was very useful, a broad, holistic view on what's happening with privacy professionals and companies. So thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you for inviting me, Punit.
Thanks, Daniel, and for everyone else, see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope you liked this effort. Please do click like, comment, and share. It is okay if you did not like it. Please still do make a comment and share with us what we can improve. If you have suggestions, ideas for guests, or you want to have your question answered, please email me. My email is info@punitbhatia.com. You can also share this with others, and if you do so while tagging me in, I will personally thank and acknowledge your contribution in coming episodes. Thanks once more, and look forward to seeing you back. Till then, stay safe, stay blessed, and stay happy.